So as we look at the whole leader, we're looking at vocational excellence and how you perform, physical vibrancy and how you live, emotional maturity is how you feel, intellectual development is how you think, spiritual vitality is how you worship, and today we're going to be looking at relational wholeness, and this is how you interact in those life-giving relationships, godly intimacy, and family harmony. And as we look across this, we can look at this both as the individual and as well as the individual from a leadership perspective. In the next video, we'll be discussing at the leadership level, but right here today in this video, we'll be looking at it from the individual's perspective. Now, as an individual, there's a lot of varying changes depending upon your seasons, different relationships that we're looking at. It's not uncommon for someone whose natural personality is more outgoing to be more open to this, and for those who are a little bit more introverted, to kind of maybe push back on the importance of relational wholeness, assuming this is primarily for the extroverts, or at least this is for someone else. The truth of the matter is that relationships are important for all of us, every one of us across the different facets of our life. Although those whose relationships maybe look a little bit different from person to person. The whole leader does not describe what a healthy relationship ought to look like, but rather identifies various aspects of relationships that one should consider. Sustaining relationships with family, sustaining relationships with friends, sustaining relationships with colleagues, and sustaining relationships with community members. Sustaining relationships with family is vitally important whether you're single, married, and especially if you have children. Success in ministry does not automatically translate to sustaining healthy relationships at home. On the contrary, success in ministry is often a challenge and a stress for those within the home. Stress and struggles in ministry often translates to pressure on family relationships, which is why this is one of those areas as ministers of the gospel we ought to remain very vigilant in attending to. Pastor and New York Times bestselling author Mark Batterson repeatedly shares that he wants to be famous in his own home. What does it matter to gain the whole world, but to lose those relationships that are nearest and dearest to us? Close bonds with our siblings, loving relationships with our parents, and for those who are married, this is a unique level of intimacy to maintain in those healthy and thriving relationships for our spouse. Now, often we see in the movie someone who falls in love. And that's a familiar idea, but what we don't see is people falling into healthy relationships. Healthy relationships takes work, takes intentionality, and it takes effort. Because as we walk through these relationships, we can merely survive or we can aim to thrive. For those of you that might be married, if you have not murdered your spouse today, you survived another day of marriage. But shooting to thrive, now that's a different target. Likewise, for those who are parents, if your goal is to simply get your kids out of the house and wait until they graduate and they move on and then you've accomplished the goal of raising them, again, that's merely surviving. What we're aiming for is there to be those vital relationships as we're thriving in those relationships in our lives. But it's not just those within our home, sustaining relationships with our friends. From grade school to high school, perhaps even on to college, friends were a vital part of our life, vital part of growing up. And it's easy to get kind of caught up in the importance of those relationships when we're younger. But as we get older, those relationships often tend to kind of drift apart. And then we get to a part where we're so busy in ministry that maybe it's difficult for us to think back of the last time we sat down and connected, really truly connected with a friend. Relational wholeness requires healthy relationships with friends in a way that fits with how God created you. In our home, it's often brimming with people. My wife and I and our 3 kids generally would all agree that the more in the home, the merrier. But how we spend time with those while they're under our roof is very different. For my wife, she's the center of the party. She's there connecting with people. She'll be talking in large groups, and she's finding personal, intimate information about everyone, and she remembers their names. She remembers what's going on in their life, and she very much gets energy from that time with a large group of people. Our oldest daughter, she's probably just more comfortable and happy just being with her closest friend. We might have a handful of teenagers over our home, but if she's able to spend time with that one closest friend, she's really satisfied. Now, for me, I'm probably somewhere in the middle. I enjoy having a close conversation with whoever is sitting right next to me. On a Sunday morning, I might be standing up on the platform before our entire congregation, but when in my home, having conversations, connecting with friends, I'm fine for it just to be that one-on-one and that close personal conversation. The key, though, is how we maintain those relationships beyond just those social gatherings, how we connect with them throughout the week, throughout our life, and develop those sustained relationships with friends. In ministry, we have a lot of different people that are in our lives. We've got board members, staff members, perhaps church members, the other pastors in our network. And how do we relate to each and every one of them? And sometimes we feel like maybe we need to wear a different hat or be a little bit different with each of them. But being able to identify those friends, and I pray that there are those within our network that you truly count as friends, but being open to having those people that just simply know you by your first name, those that you're able just to sit down and be there in your life. Speaking of those in our ministry, those our colleagues, we're talking about sustaining relationships with our colleagues. Now, I know that you and I are not in the same room right now as we're watching this video, but in this video and the entirety of the whole leader curriculum is birthed out of a desire from your colleagues at the network office to care for you. The other ministers in your section, ministers at other churches in your community, and even your friends from the college, they understand the unique challenges, the unique joys of serving in ministry. As iron sharpens iron, they can be a blessing to your own health, and they can help you across the various elements of the whole leader. I would not be who I am today if it weren't for some of the colleagues that I've had who have cared for me and even at times allowed me to care for them. I can think back to our time on staff at a church in New Jersey. And in our section, we had a monthly gathering for youth pastors. And at the time, I thought it was just an opportunity to connect with other people and have lunch. But now, some 20 years later, some of them are still some of my closest friends that I talk to on a regular basis. We have now done life together, these colleagues that were able to enjoy some of the joys and also be there during some of the difficult times. It's not just our colleagues from within the church or other pastors, but having sustaining relationships with the community members. And this one can be a bit of a challenge. We often get pulled into kind of that echo chamber of church members, church staff, and other church leaders, and we come really insulated from the gifts of the blessings of those out there in our community. Rod Loy shares in his book, 3 Questions, how he intentionally invested time out in his community. He volunteered serving as a teacher's aide. He spent the summer working as a lifeguard at a swimming pool just to be around other people in the community and really some of those mutually beneficial relationships. And mutually beneficial relationships, that's one of the keys as we're looking at those sustaining relationships. We're also looking for relationships that are growth fostering, as well as relationships that are empowering. I'm so grateful that in our former pastorate, that our city manager took the time to routinely connect with me for breakfast, and occasionally we get our wives together for dinner. It created a bond for us to be able to pray for one another and also to able to share some insights from outside of our bubbles. Him, the bubbles of politics, and for me, within the church world. I was better for it. He believed he was better for it. And I believe that both our church and our city benefited from those sustained relationships. But those relationships change over time. I mentioned at the outset of this video that this will be unique for each person. And not just because of your different personality preferences or the uniquenesses of different relationships in your life, but also those ever-changing seasons of ministry. We'll talk more specifically about leadership and those leadership seasons in the next video, but your life needs those relational requirements based upon where you are, and they shift during those seasons. When our kids were younger, when we'd go to district events, one of the highlights was always time in the swimming pool. And we would get there early, intentionally stay up late, find some downtime so that we could spend time with our kids in the swimming pool, even as we had a full day of meetings. And in those swimming pools, we would connect with other pastors, other missionaries that were in a similar season. We created some really great friends, just simply those times of being with our kids, being with other parents with their kids in the pool. Now, some of those days have gone as our kids have grown up, and now we enjoy when we have friends and family come over to our house and join us in our swimming pool. But they shift and they change. We recognize there'll be a day where we'll have an empty nest, and as they move off, being able to recognize that our roles in our life, not only they shift based upon our personalities, but also some of those seasons. Looking at inviting others into our life where we're at. My in-laws, retired pastors, are now crisscrossing the country, spending time with friends and people that they met, both new and old friends in their life. Andy Stanley has the phrase, for now, not forever, that he uses often. And it's a simple way just to remind us that some of the things that we're walking through, they're for now, not forever. They're for this season. And so as we look within our life, that relational wholeness of what we might need and require and benefit from right here, right now, during this season. Back when I was in graduate school, serving at 2 internships with our first baby there in the home and married, there were certain kind of challenges in that moment. And so church softball was just simply out of the question. In that season, there wasn't room for it. Afterwards, that certainly became something that was really important for the family. I might not have enjoyed it as much. I might not have been very good on the field, but the family really benefited from getting together with other families. Now that I've had a sporting injury, softball once again is out of the question as we've adjusted during those different seasons of our life. So we're looking at the relational wholeness for us as an individual. Begin by thinking and describing, what season are you in? Try to understand what types of relationships are strong and maybe some of those areas in those relationships that you could benefit from investing into. Understand your current family dynamics and how you can both speak into those relationships as well as receive some of those gifts from those relationships in your life. You can go and take the relational health assessment and see some of your strength and some of your growth areas where they might be. And we encourage you to stay engaged with more of the Whole Leader resources that we have here online.